It is my pleasure tonight to introduce our guest speaker. But before that, I want to make two comments. One, that we do have a Facebook page, and you can join that Facebook page for information. It is Tea Party of Gilmer County, capital T-E-A. I asked David Pennington, I said, I've got a long list here of things that he's done in his accolades, and he said, forget about it. I will tell you he's civic-minded. He's served in a number of chair positions in Dalton. He is a native of Dalton. And most importantly, what he wants me to say is that he is known as an outspoken advocate for fiscal discipline at all levels of government. Is that right? I'd like to introduce
everybody. Great, I'll throw the microphone out into hysterical letters. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, John. I'm going to stand behind that podium there. It's too confining. First of all, I feel a little lonely tonight being LJ in Gilmer County without Joe McCutcheon. Joe is my #1 fan, chief publicist. Colonel Poole ranks right up there with him, so I'm sure after this is over with, he's going to call Joe to get him a report if I screw this up. Secondly, it's great to be in Gilmer County because it's almost like my home county. And my son already knows that. He's never been over here with me. When I was over here at Colonel Poole's barbecue months ago, and Channel 11 was there, and I spoke, and I have to mention that I was considering running for governor. And they came up at the end of it and asked me whatever, and I told them, yeah, I'm seriously considering that. And then the governor's press spokesman was quoted in the newspaper, the Atlanta newspaper, saying, he's crazy, he probably couldn't even carry his own county. And my son said, I don't know if you can carry Whitfield County or not, but he said, I bet you can carry Gilmer County. And so I feel like I'm amongst friends here. But people are asking, why are you considering this challenge of a sitting Republican governor in his own primary? And it reminds me of a comment by Bill Clinton when he was running for president the first time, when he said he's the economy student. And people need to realize where we are in Georgia economically. And a lot of people don't realize it. They know it's slow. They know it's not what it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but they really don't realize, how bad it is. From 2001 through 2011, the national economy outgrew Georgia's economy by 71%. Bringing it closer to home, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Florida's economy grew 100% faster than Georgia's economy. Alabama grew a third faster than Georgia's economy. And just this last week, Friday morning, our unemployment rate went up again to 8.3%, while Alabama's went down to 6.7%. So that puts it in perspective where we are when it comes to an economic growth standpoint. If that wasn't bad enough, we also grew very rapidly population-wise. We grew the second fastest in the South, and North Carolina outgrew us by about 1 percentage point. So we've added all these people with very little economic growth to pay for it. If you look at our most important areas as far as our economy is concerned, Metro Atlanta, in 2000, I think it was, they finally caught the national average in median income. Since that time, they have now fallen back again to where they're $2,500 per person below the national average. So you can see in this 21st century has not been kind to Georgia at all. And when you look at it, sitting there, a lot of people think, well, this all occurred since the recession. Well, the recession hit in 2008. Well, from 2000 through 2010, Georgia lost 14% of their jobs paying over $50,000 a year. Over half of those were lost by 2005. That was 2 years before the recession. Well, that's telling you we've got a structural issue in Georgia. We can't wait for the national economy to start growing again rapidly or whatever and think it's going to pull us along with it. That's not going to happen. Georgia has not always been this way. From 1979 through 1997, we ranked #1 in per capita income growth. #1. We went from 34th amongst states in per capita income to 21st. Since then, we've ranked 49th in per capita income growth, and we've gone from 21st down to 42nd. We're now poorer on a relative basis to the rest of the states than we were in 1979. So what do? Well, to keep it simple, you always got to keep it simple when it comes to government, because if it gets too complicated, they spend even more money. We need to concentrate on 3 areas, all of them began with an E. The first was the economy. We've got to get our economy growing again above trend. If not, this population growth that we've had with mostly poor people and a lot of poor children are going to overwhelm everything that we're doing. And the first thing we have to look at, obviously when you see the structural issues that we have, is our tax. Our taxes. Our tax structure is completely uncompetitive. We rank 34th in America in business taxes according to the Tax Foundation, and 40th in our income tax. Well, we better rank in the top 10 when you dug the hole we have, we're going to dig our way out of this. And right now we are far from the top 10. The second part of that when it comes to that is obviously if you're going to cut taxes, and a lot of the tax proposals you've seen down there starting 3 years ago, we haven't seen any really income tax proposals since then, was to shift it all to the sales tax, where you're still taking the same amount of money out of people's pockets. And when you do that, you're not going to start growing an economy if you're still just shifting and having tax people. We need to cut taxes, the income tax, by 20%. First of all, by cutting the size of government. And people say, well, how are you going to do that? Well, you reduce the size of government, mostly from an employment standpoint. And when I first ran for Mayor of Dalton, I told people we're going to do that. They said, we can't do that. I said, why can't we do that? Well, you can't provide the services. Well, when I was first elected mayor, we did reduce the employment situation by 20% when it came to government employees. Reduced our spending by 20%. We cut property taxes 5 years in a row. Now a total of 30% cutting our property taxes. Went back to a nickel sales tax for a while from 7 cents. Unfortunately, we had to go back to 6 cents because of the same problem y'all got here. Our school system borrowed a lot of money. That SPLOST they had would not pay that off, so we had to allow them basically to pass another SPLOST in order to pay off the debt. But we did get their guarantee that they would use the SPLOST money to pay that debt off. But we're back to 6 cents, which is still lower than almost every other county in Georgia, being at 6 cents. We still invested millions of dollars in new infrastructure and grew our general fund surplus by 50%, which is far higher than almost any of our peer cities that we compare ourselves to. So I know you can do that. And also when you think of state government versus Gilmer County government or LJ government, I want you to think hard. Nobody can ever come up with an answer for me, whatever. But I want you to think hard. When you go to bed tonight, if state government goes away over the night, you wake up in the morning, they're gone. What are you going to miss? If the house catches on fire, it's a local fire department. Somebody breaking in your house, it's a local police department. Probably the roads out in front of your house is a local road department. If your kids are going to a recreation center, your grandkids, it's a local recreation department. The only thing the state really has done, or supposed to have done for us over the years, is number one, they used to fund well over half the schools in Georgia. They don't do that anymore. It's now less than half the schools. Our prison system is a complete disarray. They can't even keep the locks on the prisons anymore. We've got a prison over west of us called Hays State Prison. It's an absolute disaster. One thing about government, to me, if you're paying $1 in taxes, I'd like to at least get 90 cents value out of it. If you're going to charge me $2, give me $1.80, whatever. I'm afraid we're not even getting 50% use of the taxes that we're being charged. So don't tell me you can't reduce the size of state government. I know you can. You got to have the will to do that. And that's the first thing you need to do as far as cutting the income taxes. We can look at shifting more to a consumption tax after we cut the first 20% from the income tax. Well, if you just look back 3 years when this governor was elected, he ran as a limited government conservative. Georgia was spent $17.4 billion the year before he took office. This year, 3 years later, we're going to spend right at $20 billion. We've increased the spending by $2.6 billion. If we were just taking $2 billion of that increase, just increased it $500 million, we could cut the income taxes by 20%. The second part of the tax reform that we have to have, we need businesses in Georgia that employ a lot of people, pay a lot of local tax, property taxes. In other words, they have a lot of capital investment. You know, we need to go to 100% expensing of capital purchases for business in Georgia. The federal government allows 50% tax, the cut of that tax on that. We add it back here. If we go to 100%, we'll be more competitive than everybody else in the area. The second part of that is as you're cutting spending, we've got a runaway spending problem when it comes to the Medicaid welfare program that we have in the state. And obviously, we've got to do something to start curing that. What the present administration has done is come up with a hidden way to finance that. So obviously, they have no way of getting that under control. They took a bed tax that expired this year and made it even worse. They took that bed tax and hospital revenue 1.45%. And keep in mind, the hospitals aren't paying that tax. They're passing on to the rest of us, business people, paying patients. They can't pass it on to Medicaid, Medicare. They're passing on just to the business side of it and the paying patient side of it, or the independent patient side of it. 1.45%, costing about $240 million a year. Well, this year, not only did they renew it, they also removed it from the legislative control as far as having to raise that tax as Medicaid goes up. Took it to the Department of Community Health that the governor appoints. They now have the authority to take it from 1.45% to 6% if needed, which will take that tax from $240 million a year on Georgia business and individuals to $1 billion a year. And they really have no pressure now to do anything else but that because they don't have to vote on it yet. Another board can increase those taxes on us without a representative ever being held to tax increase. Well, there's two things you have to do with Medicaid. First of all, you've got to have less people own that Medicaid welfare system, which means we've got to have better jobs in Georgia. And I can assure you right now, the best hope we have is to expand the manufacturing sector. To get them to a decent manufacturing job, paying $14 or $15 an hour, and also health benefits to get them off Medicaid. The second part of that is tort reform. We need serious tort reform in this state, led by medical tort reform. And Texas did that in 2003. First of all, what happens is that in Georgia, 82% of doctors polled admitted, they practice defensive medicine. They're ordering $14 billion a year in unnamed tests. That's over $1,200 for every man, woman, and child in Georgia. It's costing us on our private insurance. It's also costing the Medicaid program when you're ordering that many tests that are unneeded. If you just cut that in half, you're talking about billions of dollars. The second thing, which is a sideline benefit to that, we have a serious problem in Georgia, and I bet you can do over here too, with enough doctors in rural areas. What they found in Texas, once they made it easier for doctors or more comfortable for doctors to practice in Texas, they suddenly have a lot more doctors per 100,000 population. We need the same thing to happen in Georgia. So those are the things economically that we need to concentrate on quickly. And as I said before, we can cut the taxes by controlling the spending, which we have not been willing to do over the last 3 years. We made it fine spending $17.4 billion a year 3 years ago. Why suddenly do we have to be spending $20 billion a year now? The second is education. One thing economically we have to focus on now is high school education is no longer enough to have a decent job. We're also finding out we've got a lot of high school graduates that really don't know the curriculum as a high school graduate should. Well, you can trace the decline in public education from the centralization first in the state capitals and now in Washington, D.C. I'm sure a lot of y'all heard about Common Core. What we need to do is decentralize the control back to local communities. Because if you don't get local communities re-involved in the public education system, we will not change the achievement. But I'll assure you, local communities are not going to get involved as long as the power is held in Atlanta, Georgia, or now Washington, D.C., or with this new Common Core initiative as far as who set the standards where. Our problem is not high enough standards. How's that? Get some kind of feedback. I don't have a cell phone. Can y'all still hear me? Our problem is not standards. Our problem is the fact that we're not educating kids well enough. And I'll assure you, when it worked best, when I was in school, local governments and local people were involved in the school systems because they were calling all the shots or most of the shots. Well, when the state was funding over 70% of the cost of local school systems, maybe they had the right to have all the power to call the shots. Now they're funding less than 50%. And to show you just one thing in Dalton and Whitfield County, what local control would mean from an expense standpoint. If we could put the Dalton City schools in the city of government health plan, it would save them over $1 million a year. The teachers would pay less for their insurance and have better coverage. We could put the county school system in and save them over $2 million a year. They're not allowed to do that. They have to go through the state merit system. That shows you different things of how you can control spending if you go back to local control. The last part of that, which is we've got a great university system in Georgia. University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, a lot of regional universities that do a really good job, but their costs are completely out of control. So in the last 5 years in Georgia, the net cost of tuition per student has grown by 77%. That's almost double the next closest state. We are pricing college educations out of our kids' hands. We've got to change that, and we've got to be able to get control of that spending. The last E, which was obviously a hot topic in this last session, ethics. You know, we're constantly voted one of the most unethical states in America. I'm tired of saying that. I mean, you got New Jersey up there, we're down there in New Jersey, that's embarrassing. But I'm not really after the meal money and the rest of it. I'm not really concerned about that. The best way to control, you know, political behavior is with the sunshine laws and turn the light on. They passed very stringent open meetings laws for local city councils, local county commissions, and school systems a number of years ago. And this Attorney General is running around enforcing that law. They exempted themselves from that. They should be under the same open meetings that local government is also. And I can tell you what that will mean. First of all, when you look at this ethics bill that they voted on the last day of the session, none of our representatives knew what was in it till that day. Because they had secret meetings in the Capitol among 6 or 8 legislators in rooms nobody knew where they were. They negotiated the whole deal, put the whole bill together, and sprung it on the last day of the session to vote on. Several of them had the courage to admit we didn't even know what we were voting on. Well, that's not representative government. That's as unethical as anything I can find. They need to have the same open meetings laws that we have and operate that way. If you look at where our real opportunity is in Georgia, we've got to do some things quickly because, as I said, we've got a real issue building with this poverty situation in Georgia. But Georgia has wonderful assets, particularly as far as becoming a real manufacturing powerhouse again. Unfortunately, because of our poor structure, we've lost more manufacturing jobs per capita than any other state in the South. But if you look down there with the ports, things like that, I look at manufacturing as far as building a manufacturing economy as a three-legged stool. The first leg has to do with infrastructure. And our leg's pretty sturdy when it comes to infrastructure. We've got probably the finest ports in America, one of the greatest airports in the world. We have the finest interstate network in the South, the best railroad system in the South. Great utilities, very, very competitive utilities. Georgia Power is a great utility. One thing I think a lot of people complain about at the moment, but I think they're going to find out it's a real benefit once that Plant Vogtle nuclear expansion is finished, because the federal government's held up most all of the projects. And nuclear generated electricity is still the most efficient way to generate electricity. That will once again give us a big leg up. Unfortunately, the next 2 legs are a little bit wide. The second leg, when it comes to education, they've already said we're struggling when it comes to K-12 education. We need to decentralize it, let local communities innovate. In Dalton, we've got a project going right now called Readers to Leaders. State government has nothing to do with it. The federal government has nothing to do with it. We're getting at kids from the time they're born and giving them experiences that our kids or grandkids normally have. Because we're finding out when they start pre-K, they're already so far behind they can't get caught up. So that's one thing that we need to do quickly as far as decentralizing, because you'll see a lot more innovation, give teachers more control, and give local school systems more control. Will there be losers? There'll be some losers across Georgia, but there'll be a lot more winners than losers, and that beats having one big loser that we have right now in Georgia. The last leg of the stool is very wobbly. It should be the easiest to fix, and that is our government side. Our tax structure, our regulatory structure, was supposedly governed by limited government conservatives, because every time they come out for re-election, they tell us they are. And if we can't get things such as tax reform, tort reform, with a completely dominating Republican House, Senate, and governor's office, we're never going to get it. And if you think nationally, when the last time we had a situation like that from 2002 through 2006, Republicans had the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. And they blew up the budget, spent more money than we ever dreamed they could spend, put more regulations on businesses, and this was limited government Republicans. We know how that ended up. Let's not have that happen again in Georgia. This is a great state with wonderful resources, and it will make the difficult decisions to move forward, shrink state government, which can be done, truly operate as limited government, because the only effective government is limited government, because the bigger the bureaucracy gets, when you're paying $1 in tax, you're going to get 50 cents back in services, as long as you continue to let it expand. And it's something you've got to be vigilant about all the time as far as controlling that size, as far as letting it grow like that. But, if Georgia does not, do that over the next 3 to 4 years, the demographics in Georgia are changing dramatically. A lot more minorities, a lot more younger people moving in. I don't think we'll have this opportunity 5 years from now with what we can do now. And we'll take this opportunity to make Georgia great again. We used to lead the South, one of the leading states in America, from 1979 to 1997. Those resources are still here. And it's time for us to make that happen. We're going to make it happen with limited government, not ever expanding government, regardless of who's in charge. Thank you all for listening.